As you can see, I love chawan of all shapes and sizes. And if you've looked up chawan on the internet before, you might have seen these graphs and charts and diagrams showing you all the different shapes that chawan come in. They're useful, but they don't tell you quite how to tell them apart or what makes each shape unique or why it's called what it's called. So today I'll walk you through some of the main shapes of chawan. I'll stick to the shapes because the styles and history of each type is another story that will take another video, or 12. I'll try and present these in some sort of sensible order, but there's quite a few and it's really hard to put them in an order. Why not start at the very beginning, chronologically, with Tenmoku-gata. Tenmoku-gata, meaning Tenmoku style, refers to bowls that look like these. As you'll notice with all of these shapes, the term is usually paired with the word gata, meaning style, or nari, meaning shape. Tenmoku is a very complicated subject which has lots to do with history, style, shape, glaze, and ceramic technology, and culture, but as I mentioned, we're sticking to shape to keep this simple. So the Tenmoku shape is defined by having a small foot, or kodai, a conical shaped body, and this indented and outward flaring lip. I have two examples here, one being a modern Japanese Tenmoku, and the other being a modern Chinese Tenmoku. The shape for Tenmoku is relatively standardized, with the only differences being the height and width proportions and the amount of curvature in the body and the lip. Here we have a more curved body and a more subtle lip, and here we have a straighter body and a more pronounced lip. The small foot and conical shape gives these bowls really elegant and dignified appearance, but it does make them a little wobbly to whisk on. As you can tell, they have a very high center of gravity. As such, they are invariably paired with a lacquer stand when being used in a tea ceremony, called a Tenmoku dai, or a Tenmoku stand. One of these. This is much more stable and looks quite cool. The Tenmoku shape is obviously tied to the concept of the Tenmoku chawan, which, as I mentioned, has a long and complicated and very interesting history, which I'll get to another time. But these bowls were developed roughly around the same time as the concept of whisking tea was invented in Song Dynasty China. So these bowls were designed for whisking in. One of the features that makes them so good for making whisked tea in is the lip indent, which sometimes gets called supponguchi in Japanese, meaning soft shell turtle mouth. I'm not going to expound on that. This indent is not restricted to the silhouette on the outside, but is also present on the inside of some Tenmoku chawan, and this helps keep the tea from splashing out when whisking. On the outside, the indent is also a nice way to sort of nestle the bowl into your lip as you drink from it, like so. And there's no tea in here, obviously. This shape is mostly associated with the Tenmoku chawan that came straight from China, or replicas thereof, such as these. But this shape is also seen used with other glazes, such as kiseto or even pure white porcelain. Next up, in a vaguely chronological sense, Ido-gata. Ido-gata means Ido type. Ido means well, but that's not important here. Like Tenmoku-gata, Ido-gata is named after a specific type of chawan that originated this shape, in this case the Ido chawan. This is a replica of a Korean O-Ido, or big Ido chawan. As you can see, is pretty big. The defining features of the Ido shape are a tokin, or a point on the inside of the foot, a takenofushi kodai, or bamboo node foot ring. So that's referring to this little bump in the foot. So it goes up, out like the node of a bamboo stalk, and back in again. Moving up from there, most Ido-gata chawan have the sort of scooped out section as you lead from the foot up into the body. And from there up, it's roughly conical again, but without the indent and flared lip that the Tenmoku-gata has. Another common feature to the Ido shape are these wavy lines called rokurome, meaning pottery wheel marks. These are the result of the potter's fingers as they go up and down the bowl, shaping it on the pottery wheel, or rokuro. The Ido-gata shape is not restricted to Ido chawan proper. As you can see, here is a kohiki chawan with the same shape, but at a smaller size. We still have a tokin, a takenofushi kodai, This foot is a little shorter. On many of the classical Edo chawan, the foot itself is actually very tall, especially for the Oido varieties, and a relatively conical shape without much of a flaring lip. How straight-sided the walls are isn't particularly strictly defined. On some Edo chawan they are very straight, like the Tsutsu Ido, but on some they're a little softer, like on the very famous, perhaps the most famous chawan in existence, the Kizaemon Ido, pictured here. Unlike Tenmoku chawan, which were designed for making tea in, the original Edo chawan were probably rice or other food bowls imported from Korea. As such, they weren't designed specifically for making matcha in. It's actually quite hard to whisk tea in a bowl this big. The tall foot found on a lot of Edo-shaped chawan might have come from the fact that these bowls were originally used for potentially ceremonial or ritual practices in Korea before they were imported into Japan, but this is up to a bit of scholarly debate, so we're not quite sure. Most modern Edo chawan are much smaller than the originals for ease of use, but these are really fun. Famously, tea master Furuta Oribe thought that the Edo chawan was so big that he decided to cut it into 4 pieces, sand it down, and glue it back together with lacquer to be a more reasonable size. Edo chawan first appeared in Japan around the 14 to 1500s, along with a wave of other Korean bowls, so the next few shapes that we'll see will be mostly inspired by these Korean bowls. Up next, Hatazori-gata or Komogai-nari. Now there's a bit of confusion between these two terms because they are actually quite similar but refer to 2 separate aspects about the bowls, so I'll talk about them both at the same time and what makes them similar or makes them different. Hatazori-gata means curving lip type, and that refers to bowls that have a curving lip, like those seen here. Komogai-nari or Komogai-shaped means bowls that are shaped like Komogai chawan, the same way that Ido-gata and Tenmoku-gata refers to bowls that are shaped like those famous bowls. Hatazori-gata is a bit more of a generic term, whereas Komogai-nari refers more strictly to bowls that adhere to the shape of a Komogai chawan. I don't have a Komogai chawan here with me, but here's a picture of one. You can see it has a very wide and tall foot with a wide curved base to the body and has the curving lip. Like Edo chawan, Komogai chawan originally came from Korea and belonged to a class of chawan called Korai chawan, or Korean-styled chawan. As such, this curving lip shape is often seen on bowls that are mimicking or inspired by these Korean bowls. Here I have a kohiki and a komishima style. Both of these are Korean in origin. This shape is probably one of the easiest to work with. It has a wide round base for ease of whisking, and the curved lip makes it really nice to drink from. This flared lip style is a very common and classical shape found across teaware, not just chawan. You'll also see this in teacups or even soup bowls. Korean-style chawan were the dominant style preferred in the 14 and 1500s up until the late 1500s, when attention turned away from Korean ceramics towards domestic Japanese ceramics, bringing us to our next shape, Hantsutsu-gata. Hantsutsu-gata, meaning half cylindrical shape, is most commonly associated with chawan styles of Japanese origin, called wamono, or Japanese objects. While Korean and Chinese ceramics of the time preferred softer, rounder, curvier shapes, the domestic Japanese style was much sturdier and cylindrical. Part of this is due to style and taste, and also due to ceramic technology. In either case, when tea bowls started being made in Japan, they were typically of this shape. Hantsutsu-gata chawan have a low, wide foot, a very flat base, and relatively straight walls that form a cylinder, hence the name. The most emblematic style of this shape is the raku chawan, developed by Senno Rikyu and Chojiro, more or less, in the late 1500s. These are often seen to be the pinnacle of the tea bowl or chawan. Most raku chawan are made in the Hantsutsu-gata shape with a few specific details, notably the uneven rim, often called the gosan or 5 mountains, as the little peaks and valleys of the uneven rim resemble a mountain or hillscape. I'll talk more about raku chawan in a separate video. Maybe. Yes, eventually, I guess. In addition to raku styles, Hantsutsu-gata is seen across the traditional wamono styles, such as shino, kiseto, oribe, and practically every other style made in Japan. It's ubiquitous. Another example here is an onihagi, a much more modern style of chawan, with a split foot, or warikodai. There are a few variations on the classic Hantsutsu-gata shape that would fall vaguely under the Hantsutsu-gata umbrella of terminology, if you would. I would. Some have straight walls, some are slightly curved in with a folded over lip, and some have defined waists, which some people call dojimari-gata, or the waisted shape. But these generally fall under the roughly cylindrical shape that is Hantsutsu-gata. Now you might be thinking, half cylindrical? Where's the other half? This brings us to our next type of chawan, the Tsutsu-gata, or cylindrical shape. Now, you could have guessed this one, but Tsutsu-gata means cylindrical shaped. These are shaped like cylinders. They are like Hantsutsu-gata chawan, but taller, and usually slightly narrower as well. I've included this one in this category as well because it sits kind of in between both shapes, and it's good to see the variation that exists in this shape. Tsutsu-gata chawan are most typically used in the winter, where the tall and narrow shape helps keep the tea warmer for longer. As such, they are sometimes but rarely called fuyu chawan or winter chawan. Like with Hantsutsu-gata, you see these across the board in typically the Japanese styles of chawan, such as raku or kiseto, or sometimes aoribe, but many of the older examples actually came from Korea. I told you the history was complicated. They're not all around. Here's some examples of some Korean Tsutsu-gata chawan. The tall and narrow shape of these bowls makes them kind of hard to whisk in, and if they're too small, they kind of feel like using just a normal yunomi, which come in the same shape. So if tall and narrow chawan are what we use in the winter, you might be thinking, what sort of bowls do we use in the summer? And that brings us to our next shape, Hira-gata. Hira-gata means flat type, which makes sense because they're a little flatter than regular tea bowls. Because they are mainly used in the summer, they're also called natsu-chawan, or summer chawan. In contrast to the tall and narrow shape of Tsutsu chawan, the short, flat, and wide open shape of Hira chawan makes the tea cool down faster, so that when you go to drink it, it's not as hot, which is nice and refreshing in the summer. The shape has the opposite issue of Tsutsu chawan in that it's kind of easy to whisk in, but it's also too easy to whisk in that the tea flies out of the bowl if you whisk too vigorously, so you got to pay a little bit of attention. There's a little bit of variety in the actual profiles of Hira chawan. They're not always exactly the same shape. Hira just means that they are wider and flatter than your regular chawan. For example, here I have a sort of Hatazori-gata shaped, this sort of flaring lip that you saw in the previous flared lip chawan, but in a slightly flatter form. So I would call this a Hira chawan, but with a curving lip. In contrast, this one has a more straight-sided shape. Another common shape doesn't quite have a name, but instead of having a base that flares out from the foot that turns into the body that comes up, it's more of a straight line out from the foot, sort of like a cone but even flatter. These are found commonly on old celadon bowls from China and replicas thereof. Another variation on the Hira-gata style is the Badarai chawan, or horse trough or horse bucket chawan. These are shaped like Hantsutsu-gata chawan, the cylindrical ones, but wider and flatter. So it is, in many ways, the summer version of the cylindrical winter chawan. So far, all the shapes that we've looked at have been circular in profile, like you'd expect a bowl to be. And one man took issue with that and said, no, circles are too boring. I want shoes. Now, by shoe, I mean shoe-shaped, Kutsu-gata. Kutsu-gata chawan refers to bowls that have been intentionally distorted into these vaguely clog-shaped shapes. This style was probably developed, or at least preferred, by Furata Oribe, the student of Sen no Rikyu. Rikyu developed the nice, simple, clean lines of the raku chawan, and his student said, no, that's too boring, let's get weird with it, and made these things instead. Kutsu-gata chawan, by nature of their intentionally distorted shapes, are kind of weird to use. They're a little difficult to whisk in, but they're actually kind of nice to drink from, if you know how to drink from them properly. As you might know, every chawan has a face, or shomen, and you're traditionally not supposed to drink from the face, because that would be rude. Instead, you're told to turn the chawan to drink from a different side. In most tea ceremony schools, they'll tell you to turn the bowl twice, so you drink from the back. But for Kutsu-gata chawan, that doesn't quite work. This is weird to drink from. It doesn't fit right in the hand. It's a little weird. In Oribei's time and in schools descended from his teachings, bowls would probably be turned only once, 90 degrees. This way the bowl sits comfortably in the palm and you get this sort of drinking mouth, or nomiguchi, to drink from. And it's actually really, really nice to use. As you might be able to guess, Kutsu-gata chawan are most commonly found on bowls that bear Furuta Oribei's name, Oribei chawan, such as this Kuro Oribei here. They're not really commonly found on our Oribei, the green ones that are more common these days, because these are a more recent invention. Most of the original Oribei chawan were black because the green clashed too much with the color of tea. The green Oribei style was mostly reserved for foodware. Following with the individualistic spirit of Oribei, the Kutsu-gata shape is not very standardized. They're all variously squishy in various different ways. Here's some examples. As Oribei became the most respected tea teacher in all of Japan, this style became widespread outside of just the Oribei styles of ceramics. So you'll see Kutsu-gata chawan from karatsu or hagi as well. But this style soon fell out of favor and everyone went back to drinking from circular bowls, like normal people. I personally prefer the funny ones. That brings us to the last major shape of tea bowl I'll be talking about today, Wan-nari chawan, or bowl-shaped tea bowls. You might be thinking that's really dumb sounding, but there's a catch. The one in Wan-nari and the one in chawan are spelled differently. One has the radical meaning wood, and one has the radical meaning stone. Wood meaning bowls made out of wood, and stone meaning bowls made out of ceramic. Haha. So a better translation for Wan-nari is wooden bowl-shaped chawan. This really means bowls that have a gentle curve to a straight lip. There's no curving of lips, there's no indented lips, there's no straight sides, and there's no weird funky shoe shapes. It's just a simple bowl. Much like a Japanese soup bowl, hence the name. This shape has been around since the invention of the bowl, but I've left it to the end because it's most commonly associated with Iroe kyoyaki chawan, that is these bowls that have the delicate paintings on them, which were one of the latest developments in chawan styles. This shape is incredibly popular and is probably the most common shape you'll find in any matcha bowl because it is classic and easy to use. Of course, like every other shape I've talked about today, there are some subtle variations between bowls. Some are more curved and some are slightly more straight-sided, but generally these all fall under the Wan-nari umbrella. Now there's one variation that falls under this umbrella term that I'd like to give special attention to, and that is this shape. Despite its ubiquity and popularity, this bowl shape is not seen commonly on the graphics and charts like those I showed at the beginning of this video, and most people don't even know that it has its own distinct name, and that name is Mayu-gata, or cocoon shape. I don't actually know why it's called that. None of this reminds me of a silkworm's cocoon, but there you have it, that's what it's called. This shape is most commonly seen on painted kyoyaki chawan, and was first used by the father of this style, Nonomura Ninsei, on some of his most famous bowls, such as these. The main distinctive feature of this shape is the ever so slight tightening of the body that then flares out again and pulls in at the lip. It's like a really, really subtle waist that adds just a little bit of intrigue to the relatively simple form of the Wan-nari chawan. It's a subtle variation, but it's so common and so distinctive that I thought it's worth mentioning. Now, before you mention them in the comments, I know I haven't covered quite every shape that exists. There are a lot of them, so I'll go through a few more of them in a sort of rapid-fire style right now. We have Wa-nari or Rin-gata. This is meaning like circle shape, not particularly common. You find that mainly on the tawarade or rice bale style of chawan. What else do we have? Goki-gata. Goki-gata means shaped like Goki chawan. Goki chawan are another style of chawan from Korea. The main distinctive feature is this really tall, curved foot, which is very pronounced in this chawan. Sugi-nari. Sugi-nari means shaped like a cedar tree if you turn it upside down, because cedar trees go in, not out. This is defined by having a sort of straight but slightly curved shape without a defined koshi or hip to the bowl. This is commonly confused with Ido-gata because a lot of these illustrative guides aren't very precise in the way that they draw these two shapes, but it's not particularly common, but you can see a few examples in bowls like these. Similar, but slightly different, is the Asagao-gata, or morning glory shape. This is typically seen with absolutely straight sides that come straight off the foot, or sometimes those that flare outwards. This is not particularly common and was mostly seen in older Chinese bowls. Another less common style is the Bajōhai, or horse riding cup. This shape reminds me of a chalice with a tall stem-like foot and a small body, and often there is a hole going through the foot. The concept is that you could string this bowl to your belt or your saddle while you're riding on horseback and grip it in one hand by the foot and take a swig of your drink of choice. Tea, in my case. Momo-gata, or peach shape. This is also very similar to like heart shapes. Basically, there's a little point on one side and maybe an indentation in the other. Not particularly common, but really cute when done well. Hissen-gata, or brush washer shape. The main feature here is that it has a sharp step in the lip, usually on both sides, which is reminiscent of the vessel you'd use to wash an ink brush with. Another less common shape is Amigasa-gata, or straw hat shaped. This is another slightly warped shaped, but unlike Kutsu-gata, this is usually warped symmetrically, kind of reminiscent of one of these hats. Hat or bowl, can you tell the difference? And lastly, the least bowl-shaped looking bowl of them all, Shihō-gata, or the four-sided shape, is literally a square. It's a square-shaped bowl. That's all there is to it. The most famous example of the square-shaped chawan is Mukiguri, an original raku chawan by Chojiro, made back when people were really having fun experimenting with shapes. Of course, there are no rules in pottery, so many bowls don't fit neatly into the categories that I've outlined today, such as this chawan from Asahiyaki. It has the bamboo node foot of an Ido chawan, but the sort of off-circular profile of a Kutsu-gata or an Amigasa-gata. In fact, many of the most beautiful bowls out in the world either define their own shape, such as Ido or Tenmoku, or break the mold and fit somewhere in between. Let me know down in the comments which shape was your favorite, and if there are any styles of chawan you want to learn more about. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, please give it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please subscribe so you don't miss any. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.